Meal. We quickly jump into the session. Now, when we're talking about non-traditional security issues in the Bay of Bengal, we've generally heard and grappled with a lot of these traditional security threats so far, but the non-traditional ones, which are transnational, insidious, and often invisible till they strike, are just increasing in number over the years. Today, these pose the most immediate threat to human security, to economic stability, to environmental sustainability in our shared maritime space. These are not the threats of armies crossing borders, but of rising seas, swallowing villages, fish stocks vanishing from nets, shadowy activities undermining the very foundations of trust and sovereignty. The Bay of Bengal becomes uniquely vulnerable because it's also one of the world's most disaster-prone regions. It's battered by intensified cyclones, sea level is rising, driven by climate change. Here I'm bringing just two issues which I want to focus on, which are more recent and are still being studied. The first issue which I wanted to mention in the context of non-traditional security issues would that be of IUU fishing. IUUs, as we often call it in policy circles, is not just mere poaching, it's economic plunder on an industrial scale. And estimates suggest annual losses in the Bay of Bengal run into billions of dollars. Distant water fleets and even some local operators flout conservation rules, destroy breeding grounds, push millions of coastal fisheries, and so on. Without coordinated enforcement through information sharing or joint patrols, full implementation of regional plans like the Bay of Bengal, RPOA, IUU, what we risk losing is the richest common resource which we have of marine resources in MTCs. Compounding this is the growing presence and activities of research vessels which operate in the bay. And I think even this year we've seen several vessels which are often state affiliated. But even if they are not state affiliated, there are several other ships as well which conduct extensive seaflow mapping, acoustic environmental analysis, identification of submarine transit corridors, and so on. We can go on and on by just listing out so many of these non-traditional security threats. So what I'm going to quickly do is, because I have a brilliant panel, I will not take a further time, and we have three speakers. But just to set the rules straight, in everything there is a good cop and the bad cop. In this, I'm the bad cop. So speakers, 15 minutes will be allotted. At 13 minutes, I will ring the bell, the first bell. And after 15 minutes, you just have to wrap up. So the first speaker.
Our first speaker is Dr. Shabana Barua, who will be presenting on correlating geography and regional stability.
Good afternoon, and thank you to NMF and Global Order for having me here. I seem to have wasted 4 minutes eating my lunch extra, so I'll try and take 4 minutes less. But thank you, Professor, for this laying out the lines, so to say, of this panel, where we will be talking about non-traditional security issues. I think I learned a lot from the previous one, pertaining to mostly to connectivity, infrastructure, and also a lot of economics, which is not my subject. So I hope I can give you something which is slightly different, which is talking about geopolitics and also correlating geography and regional stability. Now, when I first heard about Samudramanthan, I was taken back to the Swarnabhumi airport at Bangkok. I think there's a very nice, so to say, art installation there which talks about Samudramanthan. And what do we really mean by it, in my opinion, and I think it's very well known that there's a churn in the ocean today. And that churn is again twofold. If you bring the best out, you get the Amrit, which means you can, optimize it. You can use the oceans and maritime resources to the best. And if you don't, then you obviously misuse it. So what we need to focus on is sustaining and sustainability and how we can best make use of it. The Galatia Bay arguments regarding development and environment, I think brought that debate out very clearly. But going on to the next phase, just laying down something slightly different from what the previous panel touched upon, because I teach, I'm a professor, I'll just talk about little on what the literature says. And even in the previous panel, we talked about Bay of Bengal reviving. And we talked about how it's come to life. And Robert Kaplan said the same thing when he said the Bay of Bengal is starting to become whole again. And it's returning to the center of history. The question therefore then is asked, was it even dead? Was the Bay of Bengal sort of out of historical narratives at some point? And I think we did talk about how the ports in Kolkata and in long back in history, they made the Bay of Bengal so the center of the world in many ways, as being brought out earlier. But it is also said that this sudden arrival again of the Bay of Bengal is not just because of China, not just because suddenly in the 2000s, the US State Department started talking about or propagated the idea of the string of pearls. And suddenly we caught on to that. It is not because Shinzo Abe only talked about or brought to fore Indo-Pacific as a term as opposed to Asia-Pacific. It's not just that. It's also because India became capable. I think that again was brought out in the previous panel. That because we became more and more capable to deliver, to connect better, to do so and so many things better, which we were not previously. And when that started happening, in fact, it was also said that because countries were becoming, low-cost manufacturing exports around the Bay of Bengal, not just India, but also, say, Bangladesh and other countries. And that's why it was being compared to this term used was called Bengal tigers. That just as the Asian tigers of the 70s, could we talk about Bengal tigers, where we are talking about India, probably also some other countries, Sri Lanka. But then again, we saw that that did not really happen. That could not happen, of course, because China was there. So therefore, the second factor, and is a big factor, is China, which is where the geopolitics of it comes. But when we redraw this mental map of saying that the Bay of Bengal is coming alive again, we talk about how what really brought it to the fore when it came alive. The institution, the multilateral institution, which is BIMSTEC, which came up in 1997, of course, did quite a magic for us. But in terms of integration, it did nothing much. And I think Dr. Day talked about it, that South Asia still remained one of the least integrated areas. And when we talk about South Asia, if we focus to the east, our eastern sides, then we started talking about the BBI, and we still did some of the projects, did connectivity, many connectivity and multimodal projects started coming to the fore. In fact, in the 2000s itself, at the time of Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, we talked about different pariyojnas at that time, trying to connect different cities, different ports also, but then that didn't translate to a Bharat Mala or a Sagar Mala. All of that started happening slightly later in the last decade or so. But then that is India's perspective. What really happened in the other countries in the Bay of Bengal, so to say the geopolitics of it. We see that in Myanmar particularly, again, I'm going to talk slightly more about Bangladesh and Myanmar than say Sri Lanka or Thailand, because that's also my expertise. But in Myanmar, we started seeing two things within the 2000s and up to about 2010 or so. Back in 1984, and this is long, long back before even India started talking about connectivity, the Vice Minister of Communications of China, Pang Chi, wrote an article in the Beijing Review in 1984, 2nd September, and he said that we need to connect Yunnan to the Bay of Bengal. And there was a plan laid out, and that if anybody can get hold of that Beijing Review of that issue of Beijing Review, there's a map there which shows how they had imagined this connectivity from Yunnan to the now obviously the port of Chokpu that already exist. Similarly, there are gas and oil pipelines that already existed even before China announced their so-called BRI project and the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, one of the 6 corridors of the BRI. So point is that these things were already in place. This is not a particularly China bashing session for sure, but I'm just putting things out in perspective. That this started happening long before maybe we had imagined. Secondly, we see also China coming close to countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. I think the stories are very well known today. I don't have to reiterate that. We have Sri Lanka, the obvious case, and the repeated and popular case is that of Hambantota. But what really happened is basically, and mind you, China was not the country which gave it the most amount of loans. That was Japan, ADB and others. And still from 2004 to 14, it managed to get that 99-year-old lease by converting what they had as, from debt contract to equity contract, and therefore they managed to get the land and then do their game, so to say. Similarly, we see that in Bangladesh, Chinese projects had already started showing up, and this is the string of pearls which we already see quite clearly in the 2000s. If we jump a little ahead, and this is also a time when BIMSTEC had laid out its so-called 14 sectors of priority. And today, in about 2022, we saw there was a narrowing down from those 14 sectors to 7 pillars, out of which we talk about in the Indian context about the security pillar. And within the security pillar, there's counter-terrorism, but also transnational crime, disaster management, and energy. And from here, I will just give you one example that already exists, or one platform that already speaks of non-traditional security. And since this is also co-organized by NMF, I'm going to talk about the IONS, the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. If you go to their website and look at the different, there are 3 in fact, it's a IONS just for the rest of us who may not be very aware. We talk about BIMSTEC, we talk about different Malabar exercise and all of that. These are in the popular literature, but when we look at the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, it's a group of about 25 countries, but this year India is the chair, and I think therefore it gives us a platform to get things done through a small example like the IONS. It has 3 main working groups. One is the HADR, one is the information sharing and interoperability, and the other is the maritime security. And it lists about 6 maritime challenges. And these are mostly to do with non-traditional security. Within this, I'll talk about 2 examples. I'll list all the 6. I know I should have had a presentation, but my apologies for that. But this is all available openly in public domain. The 6 maritime challenges that ION really lists out is piracy and robbery, contraband and smuggling, illegal human migration, maritime security threats, but I'll talk actually just about 2, so I'll just focus on that. One is contraband and smuggling. Now, why I'm focusing on this is because from 2024, the data shows a 10% increase in contraband and smuggling till 2025. I think the new data is still not out. And this has happened because of situations in Myanmar. Now, if you look at the data from 2022, it is the Golden Triangle that's become the largest producer of opium, beating Afghanistan actually. So why did that happen is because of the kind of civil war, the ethnic armed organizations that need a black market to operate, to get money out of and then run those operations within their own peripheral areas in Myanmar. And there are many, especially in the Shan state, if you see. So without getting too much into the nitty-gritties, the larger point is that something that's happening within Myanmar is impacting things that's happening in the Bay of Bengal. That is increase of smuggling and contraband. And there are 9 items that are listed as drugs and different types of items that are listed there. The highest is that of drugs. they had in 2025 346 instances, for instance. And that has mostly methamphetamine type substances, ATS, and what we also know as commonly in the markets, it's known as yaba or meth tabs. So the kind of production that's happening from there and then getting smuggled mostly via Bangladesh, surprisingly not via Myanmar, not via Thailand, but via Bangladesh. So that is one thing that impacts India's northeast. I think we all know that, how that has impacted. Some have even talked about data coming out, how that's impacted the conflict within Manipur, for instance. But beyond that, the second item that, weapons, out of the 9 items that are listed in this category of contraband and smuggling, weapons, how many instances? 25. So we should not bother about security in that sense. We should bother more about non-security. Even alcohol, 104. Surprising, but well, these are the kind of things that's getting smuggled out and creating a black market. Then that has an impact, obviously, in the way we talked about transshipment and other things. So what goods are really getting sometimes also passing through some of these official outlets, so to say. The other is, if you talk about energy, now again we increasingly have to talk about energy, because I think we spoke about 2047 for Viksit Bharat. In 2023, when India hosted the G20 summit, we talked about the Panchamrit. And within that Panchamrit, and we just laughed about it, that some of these things are just farcical and it's just a scam and all of that. But well, it's there in policy and we are trying our best to get to that target. So this Panchamrit, so to say, we are trying to make it a green energy, talk about green energy markets, converting to EV and so forth. And energy, if you look at the kind of energy that's available in the Bay of Bengal region, particularly offshore Myanmar coast, some of these including Yadagan and these offshore blocks that existed, lot of countries made use of this, including Japan, South Korea, China, obviously, in the 1990s itself. So the question then is, in what way can India talk about energy and make the best use? Can we talk about gaining some kind of leeway with what we have today in our neighboring countries in the BIMSTEC area? I think in the morning, just one more minute, I said I'll finish early, but just one last thing to do with this connectivity. We have laid down all the kinds of connectivity projects as vividly as we can in the previous session. But when we talk about this Galathea project or the Greater Nicobar project, we also have to keep in mind that things that we are planning today, I don't know at what pace we will finish it off. And also the funding, we are saying it's about 72,000 crores, and Rupa ma'am mentioned in the morning we should keep in mind the next 5 years. Similarly, a Kaladan project started in 2008 with so and so money, and today it's not completed. Next year we are aiming to complete it. My larger point is that when you talk about non-security threats, you talk about geopolitics in the region and making this Bay of Bengal alive. Simply put, it's not an easy task. It can, if you look at it in terms of concentric circles, it's just one of the very circles. So as much as we like talking about the Bay of Bengal, we need to zoom out and see what the larger picture is. I think I'll stop there and I'll take questions as and when it comes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barwa. If you would prefer, ma'am, you could resume your seat in the audience so that you could view the upcoming presentations, please. Our next presenter is Dr. Jimmy Udun, who will be presenting on climate, environmental security and disaster preparedness in the Bay.
Thank you, Priyasha. And a very good afternoon to everyone. And I would like to thank the organizers, National Maritime Foundation and Global Order, for giving me this opportunity. So the title of my presentation is Climate, Environmental Security and Disaster Preparedness in the Greater Bay of Bengal. I know it's quite ambitious, but it's deliberate. So what I'm arguing here is something straightforward but consequential. that these three issues, climate security and disaster, are no longer peripheral concerns for regional security, as everybody has mentioned, and I'm reiterating it, and they are central to it. And they demand the kind of cooperative regional engagement that the seminar is uniquely placed to advance. So within these 15 minutes, I'll move through the risk vulnerability of the region with evidence and the framework and the governance gaps. And I'll also close with the presentation with what I believe needs to happen next. So here, let me begin by framing the geography. Because how we frame the space shapes how we respond to it. So I use the term Greater Bay of Bengal, as has been conceptualized very well in the concept note of the program. So I use the geography Greater Bay of Bengal not as a loose geography, but as an integrated strategic and ecological zone. So BIMSTEC plus three countries, Malaysia, Singapore and Indonesia, these 10 nations whose security, economic and environmental security or environmental features are structurally connected through shared maritime space, ecological systems and monsoon dynamics, and critically shared climate vulnerability. So three facts establish these. First is what happens in the Northern Bay doesn't stay within the Northern Bay. It affects fisheries, trade, maritime system across the wider region. And second, cyclones forming off Myanmar disrupt shipping corridors and supply chains extending towards Singapore and the Malacca state. And third is climate stress and displacement in the Bangladesh, as has been mentioned in the morning as well, increasingly generate wider governance and human security pressure, which then has impact on the larger issue area. So this interconnectedness is the starting point for everything that follows. So here the data on climate risks in the region is frankly quite stark. So I want you to hear these numbers not as abstractions but as strategic realities. So I won't go through the details of it because everybody understands this number is for you to absorb. So as we know that cyclones and storm surges are one of the most vulnerable climate risks in the region. The Bay experiences 5 to 6 severe cyclones annually and accounts for nearly 40% of global deaths. And cyclone Amphan alone has impacted 13 million people in the region. And likewise, sea level again, region is experiencing 3.5 to 14 millimeter per year across the region. And Indonesia and Bangladesh are already experiencing sea level rise, and also large areas are going under the water. And coastal erosion, India also is facing a lot of coastal erosion, and Bangladesh almost 100 to 200 meter areas of 200 meters are retreating every year. And Sundarban again, which is the world's largest mangrove, is getting lost. And salinity intrusion is another challenge that we see in the region, where the hectares, the agriculture the agriculture yields and rice hectares also rice yields are also getting impacted by the salinity intrusion. And marine heat wave, the frequency has doubled since 1982, and also sea surface temperature is increasing, which again will have impact on the coastal ecosystem in the region. Flooding and extreme rainfall is another challenge in the region. So these are not distant projections, they are present tense realities accelerating in real time. So before we move on to look at where all of this leads by 2050, and because of these projections, it's framed the urgency of everything that follows, and we would probably experience or will have 216 million climate migrants, and the regional global loss would be around 11 to 17%, and the fishery loss would be between 12 billion US dollar per year, and 40 to 50% of mangrove cover in the region would be lost. And also 150,000 square kilometer of coastal line would likely to go under the water. So these are not worst case scenarios. These are median projections based on the current trajectories. The window for the cooperative intervention is open, but it is narrowing. So here I am again making a case where Bay of Bengal risk does not stay local, as I often hear the assumption that Bay of Bengal climate events are South Asian problem. So they are not, because it is a regional problem. So here we see that even though a cyclone that happens in the Bay of Bengal might not impact Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia directly, but then their indirect impact on these regions are quite high, because in terms of the rainfall and flooding, and also Andaman surge, which had impact on the wave energy that transit into the state, and also the monsoon disruption. And Singapore, it faces almost near to zero direct cyclone risk, but its dense urban infrastructure amplifies even modest weather anomalies. Again, urban flash flooding, storm Sumatras, and haze episode linked to regional atmospheric disruption and rising coastal baseline driven by sea surface temperature. In terms of Indonesia, again, it has moderate to high direct impact, and indirect impact also in terms of the monsoon disruption, extreme rainfall, which has adverse impact on the landslide, flooding, and displacement. So no state in this region or Bay of Bengal system is truly insulated, because shared climate vulnerability demands cooperative regional responses, not silos. So this brings me to the core and my analytical argument. Traditionally, maritime security is mostly focused on the traditional concerns of it, which is flagged there. And these remain relevant, as we know, but they are no longer sufficient, because climate change functions as a security threat multiplier. It intensifies or existing vulnerability across three interconnected domains simultaneously. So look at this framework on the slide, and human security, which includes livelihoods, livelihoods, and also displacement and food access, is being eroded by ecological degradation. That ecological degradation of mangrove fisheries, coastal system, freshwater, in turn destabilizes the maritime security, which impacts the regional stability, infrastructure resilience, and supply chain continuity. The arrow runs in all directions. That is the point. As ecological security increasingly translates into maritime insecurity. And when we allow ourselves to treat these as a separate policy tracks, we miss the systemic nature of the challenge entirely. So rising sea surface temperature, sea level rise, salinity, fishery loss, extreme heat, freshwater, cyclones, these are all cascading risks, not isolated events. So the integrated security framework is not an academic construct, so it is a governance necessary. That's how I have proposed this. And from here, I wanted to bring one of the challenge, which is climate-induced migration, which is perhaps the most complex human security in the region, and also one for which current framework are least prepared and does not address adequately. So drivers for climate migration and which leads to human securities are overlapping in terms of coastal erosion, cyclones, salinity, and also flooding, livelihood collapse. Together, they are reshaping migration patterns, urbanization, labor mobility, and also the social vulnerability. So which has a strategic concern in terms of it has impact on the informal settlements, trafficking vulnerabilities, and cross-border humanitarian pressures, and governance states. So it's not what I want to make a point that often gets lost is addressing climate mobility requires strengthening environmental and ecological resilience, not just the border management. And if we treat migration as a problem rather than as a symptom, we will manage the symptom but miss the cause. So on this base, I wanted to see what are the governance architecture currently exists. So currently we have BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC has some disaster management as one of its 7 priority areas, which is a formal pillar of the grouping, and it operates the BIMSTEC Disaster Management Center in New Delhi, and which is established in 2006 under India's National Disaster Management Authority. In 2021, at the 5th BIMSTEC Summit in Colombo, the member states signed the Convention on Cooperation in Disaster Management, a legally binding framework for coordinated disaster response, joint simulation exercises, information sharing across 7 members. So this was a landmark, and also in terms of the SARC, which covers South Asian Bay members, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, through its disaster management center and cooperative framework, they also have a disaster management center. And if we look at ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance, so it covers the ASEAN members at the Bay coastline, mainly the Myanmar and Thailand. So apart from that, there is the Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning and Mitigation System, which is coordinated by UNESCO and IOC, which links national warning centers across all Bay states. So this is a significant architecture, but architecture is not same as the integration. So if we look at this slide, it shows a structural problem visually. So BIMSTEC, SARC and AHA Center form an overlapping but fragmented triangle, with the Myanmar as a critical gap where all 3 meet, but where none of the mechanisms links. So also Myanmar becomes quite important to link all this, and not Myanmar, Thailand and Myanmar also sit across multiple frameworks if we remove the SARC. So the result is that the state with the most complex exposure, sitting at the intersection of South Asia and Southeast Asia, falls into the cracks between 3 governance systems. So the gap the literature identifies are 5, where there's a coordination gap between the BIMSTEC and ASEAN, and there's a weak data sharing between national meteorological agencies. Non-state and informal actors are most of the time excluded, and climate resilience and disaster response are still treated as separate policy tracks. And there's of course resource and finance constraints is one of the challenge. With these gaps, it also has a regional security implications, where fragmented coordination reduces the speed and effectiveness of disaster response, or increase vulnerability to cascading disaster and climate shocks. And also it leads to the erodes trust and limits strategic cooperation with the Bay. So here I am trying to propose towards an integrated Bay governance framework. So what does what does the architecture look like? And it is structured around 3 concentric layers. At the center, we have a BIMSTEC with its unique capacity to bridge South and Southeast Asia, providing the connective issue for the regional resilience standard, climate adaptation, and disaster response coordination and sustainable blue economic governance. Around it, we have IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association, extending the framework towards to a broader Indian ocean system, and engaging ASEAN, particularly the AHA Center, as an essential partner for Southeast Asian connectivity. So the core principle animating this framework is the one I draw from ecological science, where ecological systems transcend borders. Therefore, the resilient framework must also become transnational. The Bay as shared ecological geography, as we know that, because nature doesn't understand the borders that we build, and also no divided political territory. So we have to be cautious with the risks of securitization tab. So what I've often seen in the political discussions of approaching climate challenge only through the securitization which mainly through the border control, migration policing. So what I'm trying to say is we have to try to have to move from to two, which is border control to resilient building, and migration policing to livelihood security and resource competition to ecosystem restoration, and fragmented national response to cooperative governance. So securitization tab forecloses the cooperative space. We urgently need victory sentence while ignoring the process. With this, I'll end my presentation. We requires political will to reframe, and similar is precisely the kind of platform where we need to reframe this. So with that, I'll end my presentation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yudun. Our next presenter is Captain Himanji Das. He'll be talking about smuggling and trafficking, implications for regional security.
Okay, and the topics as fast as Dr. Barua advised. Just in the last session, I'll zoom in and zoom out into the IOR, into Indo-Pacific and back into the region. And what I've done is, the ILC IOR guys are here, and I've tried to synthesize reports from different parts of the world to perhaps get a comprehensive understanding. I also cover some other challenges. So what Dr. Barua was referring to, this is the status in the Indian Ocean region. So about 1/3 of all contraband is drugs. It's followed by domestic products such as things like turmeric and atta and dal and stuff like that. And thereafter the whole list of contraband that is there. Interestingly, if you see the regional distribution, South Asia is the second largest. However, we're not talking of South Asia, but we're talking of the Bay of Bengal, and Bay of Bengal is, for this categorization, we are part of South Asia. But the regret is that there is no data which comprehensively focuses on the Bay of Bengal. So that's point number one. The second point that I also want to make here is that there's hardly any literature on maritime security in the Bay of Bengal. The only few pieces that I came across are from people who are from the same ecosystem that I come from, the naval officers or former naval officers who have written about it. So I think these are two areas which NMF and the global affairs, global order can look at. The second is about drug trafficking itself in the Bay of Bengal, which has already been covered by Dr. Barua. But yes, psychotropic substances are the dominant type of drugs. Narcotics is waning not just in the Bay of Bengal but elsewhere as well, including from the Makran coast. There have been seizures in Bangladesh, India and Sri Lanka. IFC, IOR, ILOs are here. As per their assessment, there's a barter trade model which has developed in Bangladesh where goods are being traded for drugs. In addition, in general, drug trafficking also happens through concealment in shipping, and so that necessitates customs controls as well in the nation. So when you look at a national toolkit, you just can't look at navies and coast guards, but you need a wider toolkit to deal with it. We also see some amount of technology being used by drug traffickers in an apprehension in the Bay of Bengal. There was a Starlink satellite phone which was being used by the traffickers. This is an annual report of UNODC of 2025, which shows the drug routes crisscrossing across the world, including the Bay of Bengal and the wider Indo-Pacific. You can see the golden triangle, and you can see a broad arrow which emanates from there, which transits through the Bay of Bengal. So that, I think, is the focus of this discussion. And the other points related to this slide, of course, are that you can see it's just not one arrow from the golden triangle, but there are other routes also which transit the entire Bay of Bengal, and there are pit stops elsewhere and they head out somewhere else. So that's true even in the Arabian Sea, because what goes out from Afghanistan goes to West Africa and finally lands up in Europe and beyond. And so essentially what really is needed is cooperation among the states where this drug trafficking actually happens. This is again a depiction of the drug trafficking routes from the Makran coast. You can perhaps see that from the Makran coast the route generally goes southward and then eastward onto the Bay of Bengal, Southeast Asia, and even further down into Australia. A couple of points that I'd like to make here are these. First, you can see that the routes are fairly distant from the coast, and you've also see that the distance southward has also increased. So what essentially happens is that when enforcement of coastal states is strong, traffickers and other malified actors at sea tend to move more towards the sea and away from the coast, and that's true in the case of piracy, that's true in the case of illegal fishing, that's true in the case of drug traffic and everything else. And the second part that I'd like to draw your attention to is on the Bay of Bengal itself. This is the indicative EEZ limits of the various coastal states in the Bay of Bengal. And what you can actually see is a large part of the Bay of Bengal is a maritime zone of one country or the other. So if there are coastal states which are strong enough, have powerful enforcement mechanisms, it essentially reduces the space for any malevolent actor to operate in those maritime zones. And so the high seas is only a limited part, which is actually where, which is areas beyond national jurisdiction, as it is said. On this part, there is some evidence which indicates the nexus between drug traffickers and transnational organized crime across UAE, Pakistan, etc., etc. But the fact that drug trafficking feeds into terrorism and other forms of crime is well known. Narco-terrorism, for example, is an established fact in India. I'll move on to regular migration next. So again, in the pictorial, you can see those pink dots or blips. That's where the incidents have been monitored by IFC IOR in the 2005 report. Again, if you look at the regional distribution of the bottom half of the presentation, South Asia has actually got the least amount, which includes the Bay of Bengal. However, if you look up the text box, there have been 2 mass casualty events with 427 deaths last year. And what I understand is that perhaps 1 in 7 irregular migrant has died last year in this route. And whether it's the Mediterranean or anywhere else, irregular migration is often overcrowded and unseaworthy boats. It's a perilous journey, and search and rescue is a given after effect of these journeys. This is a report from IFC Singapore's 2005 report, which echoes similar sentiments as the IFC IOR report. However, it specifies that the route from Bay of Bengal to Southeast Asia is the route of one of the 3 routes of interest, and the other routes are in the greater Bay of Bengal and Southeast Asia. It also goes on to say that the future outlook, there is no significant change. However, predicting the future is a challenge itself, and it can be highly unpredictable. This is another snapshot from the French Navy's MICA Center of Migration Patterns in the Bay of, in the Indo-Pacific rather. And this actually brings out that the irregular migration just doesn't extend between Bay of Bengal and Southeast Asia, but into the southern India, into the Pacific Ocean. And that's an interesting observation. It's based actually on a UNODC publication, which I couldn't lay my hands on. But I think this is something which we need to monitor, and which again essentially proves that it's a related space, it's a seamless space, and it's a wider region that we need to be speaking about. Since it deals with non-traditional challenges, a few were left, so I thought for the benefit of the panel I'll cover those 2 as well. One is piracy and armed robbery. The IFC Singapore 2025 reports highlights 3 areas as flash. Most of this is actually armed robbery. That means it happens within the territorial seas of that country, but anyway, it needs to be monitored. And the last is maritime security incidents. These are essentially events related to safety, collisions, groundings, mechanical breakdowns, etc., which happen. But they are also important because off the Indian coast we've had a number of major incidents of fire, sinking, environmental damage, etc. And many of those need partnership between countries. India and Sri Lanka has cooperated in a number of responses. And with, we heard this session earlier with connectivity going up, with greater focus on port development and port-led development, traffic is going to keep increasing. And any human endeavor, there will be accidents, and so the number of accidents will rise, the number of crime will rise, and that will keep happening. And so I think there is a need for this thing. So as far as the panel is concerned, I think we've roughly spoken about everything, and after me there's going to be illegal IUU fishing, so that'll wrap up the entire non-traditional threat environment as far as the Bay of Bengal is concerned. So I think a few takeaways. First is there's no focused comprehensive data on the Bay of Bengal. And I think that's one area which one can work on, and one doesn't need confidence. There's enough data in the open sources to be extracted to really understand what the maritime security environment is. At sea, drug trafficking and irregular migration are the principal challenges, and they have implications for regional security. And if one looks at history and one also looks at contemporary events, drug trafficking and irregular migration can create regional instability and significantly so. Point number 3 and 4, essentially, we can't look at the Bay of Bengal in isolation. We need to look at it at the wider expanse of the Indo-Pacific and perhaps even the globe. Issue is just not about national security or regional security, but also about human safety and security, which is important. There's always a nexus between criminal elements that one needs to look out. And the point here that I'm trying to make is that often when you're trying to disrupt nexuses, it just can't be done by navies and coast guards or people who go to sea. It needs a wider toolkit. It needs intelligence. It needs revenue intelligence. It needs Interpol. It needs CBI and so many others. So it needs a more holistic approach to deal with it. There are no indicators of any significant change in the future, so these will persist. But I think climate change as well as development will exacerbate the challenges that we face today. So I think with that I finished the main, and now I go on to cooperative engagement for maritime security, which will also set for this stage for the next session. And I think BIMSTEC has done fairly okay in this, and I'll cover that. So I think BIMSTEC doesn't need to be bashed all the time. So Mahasagar is we're well aware of Mahasagar. Since I come from the Navy, so Mahasagar is a bigger vision, but that has to be executed on the ground by the Navy, the Coast Guard, and other agencies of the government. So just last month, the revised strategy has been published. It's available on the open domain. It sets out the Navy strategy for a favorable maritime environment and the sub-strategies therein. So it's essentially about greater presence, cooperative and collaborative endeavors, regional governance, and so on and so forth. And these apply to every field of activity of insecurity, just not other than 1 and 2, which are one in the last one, which apply to maritime security agencies. But here is I think perhaps a little heartening news. Somewhere in 2020 or beyond, the BIMSTEC expert group on maritime security cooperation was set up. They've met every year since 2022, and in the first meeting they decided on the 5 areas that they need to cooperate on: MDA, HADR, oil pollution response, the blue economy, and maritime security cooperation. Thereafter, 3 guidelines have been promulgated. One is on guiding principles on HADR, the other is on conduct and maritime law enforcement. I forgot to write that. Maritime law enforcement agencies rather, and the last one was on coordinated maritime oil spills in the Bay of Bengal. So there have been progress on. So this is the summary. So as far as MDA is concerned, BIMSTEC participated in the IFC-IOR workshop last year. A white shipping agreement as per open sources is, I believe, planned. As far as HADR and oil pollution response is concerned, guidelines have been finalized. As far as blue economy is concerned, I believe an expert group has been set up and a plan of action has been developed. As far as maritime security cooperation is concerned, one guideline has been finalized on the interaction between maritime law enforcement agencies, and an exercise is planned this year. Dr. Barua spoke about IONS. So currently IOS Sagar is in Bangladesh. I mean, at least was a couple of days back. It's traversed the entire Bay of Bengal, and again that speaks of the need for greater cohesion between international efforts, regional and sub-regional efforts. So some concluding thoughts. So I think that maritime security cooperation has witnessed steady progress since 2022, And so the first phase was conceptualization, which happened in the period, say 20 to 22. Between 22 and 25, foundational guidelines have been established for cooperation, which would be the fundamental base layer before you actually get to do something. So I think to some extent formalization has also happened. And finally, we're transiting to operational engagements. That means through the exercises which is being planned, and hopefully some of the guidelines which have been developed will be put to use in those exercises. We're having the annual meeting every year, so the next meeting would be in the later half of 2026, and I think it's a good time to review progress, to see what the imperatives are and set the plan for the next 5 years. And I think some feedback from this forum could actually feed into what the expert group should be doing for the next 5 groups, and that should be based on evidence and need-based policy imperatives. And finally, I think there is space for wider cooperation. Firstly, because resources are limited. I mean, every country has limited resources, and so there is the need for interplay and complement between regional and sub-regional forums, which Dr. Baru also, I think Jimmy spoke about, for all getting together. So with that, I finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Our next speaker is Mr. John Vachaparambil, who will be presenting on IUU fishing and resource conflicts.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, organizers, for giving me this opportunity to speak on such a very crucial topic, which is IUU fishing. So, from the morning, if you listen, even in the inaugural address, we heard that IUU fishing is such a big issue. It is not specific to a particular region. Globally, IUU fishing has been a very big non-security traditional threat. Now, for my topic, I'll be speaking on IUU fishing and resource conflict with particular focus on the Bay of Bengal region. As part of my presentation, I'll be covering these topics. So, I'll be giving a little bit of facts on fisheries in the Bay of Bengal, IUU fishing within the Indo-Pacific, drivers of IUU fishing, resource conflicts in Bay of Bengal, and so on and so forth. To start off my presentation, let us understand where exactly Bay of Bengal is situated within the fisheries region. So all of us are aware that globally there are maps that denote search and rescue areas. There are navigational area maps. So similarly, the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization has developed a map which represents major fishing areas, and if you focus on major fishing area number 57, that is where the Bay of Bengal is situated. And within area 57 there are sub areas, and within sub area 57.1 is where the Bay of Bengal region is situated. Now, if you look at the fisheries in Bay of Bengal, as Captain Das highlighted, the Bay of Bengal region has overlapping maritime zones, especially the exclusive economic zones of the littoral countries in Bay of Bengal overlap. So it also creates what is called straddling fish stocks, and Article 63 of UNCLOS rightly defines what is a straddling stock. It is a stock or stock of associated species occurring within the exclusive economic zone of 2 or more coastal states. So it is not, or it is very different from what is exactly an anadromous or catadromous species. So let's not confuse those with a straddling fish stock. And similarly to the FAO subregions, the subregional fisheries complex in Bay of Bengal is as given on the slide. So this is given or generated as for the statistical purposes. So each countries or the concerned states deals with a particular species of fish, and within that complex fisheries is all these major species of straddling fish stocks. So all the concerned states deals with all these fish stocks, and this is the coastal states' share of total fish catch in the Bay of Bengal. It's given in tonnage or metric tons, and so there's a difference when you talk about fisheries catch. So when a fishing boat goes out to the sea, and for example, if I go out to the sea, if I catch a particular species of fish, it is considered in kgs. So if I catch tuna, it will be measured in kgs. But when I land the catch, it will be in tonnage. So it is converted from kg to tonnage. And the total production for a coastal state, so all the species considered together would be in tons. But when you talk about Bay of Bengal, as already mentioned, we should also identify what is the IUU fishing scenario in the wider Indo-Pacific. So the data is taken from the IFCIR's recent monthly Maritime Security Update, or MMSU, March 2026, which reports a total of 37 IUU fishing incidents compared to 45 incidents in Feb 2026. Now this raises a very important question. Is IUU fishing going down per se, or is there increase in dark fishing? So does it mean that most of the fishing vessels are turning off their AIS and going dark, and is that why the numbers are declining? IUU fishing is, as per IFCIR, is categorized into poaching and local, wherein local is within a national jurisdiction conducted by flagged vessels of that particular state, and poaching is by foreign flagged fishing vessels in a foreign exclusive economic zone. So as you can see, there are fishing vessels, 64, and of that 267 fishermen are involved in it. And it is surprising to see that there are 60 fishing shark fin trade. I've seen baby hammerhead sharks in sail in Kerala, especially from Alappuzha, local fish stalls. So why is there an increase in IUU fishing and resource conflict in Bay of Bengal? As already alluded to by Dr. Udon, climate change is one of the important factors, especially if you look at Bay of Bengal region. So let's not confuse the IUU fishing in Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. The reasons are very different. If you look at Arabian Sea, there is an increase in Chinese distant water fishing fleets because they focus on squid fishery in Arabian Sea. And there is no particular fishery in Bay of Bengal region. So climate change, as already proved in this report, the results from this study suggest that regardless of the climate change scenario, at least 37% and 57% of stocks are projected to shift between exclusive economic zones and the high seas by 2030 and 2050 respectively. Highly migratory species, which are listed in Annex 1 of UNCLOS 1982, are also expected to shift across regional fisheries management organization. Now, while these are projections, the fact is this: fish are already migrating. India largely depended on false trevally, which is a species, and now the species are declined in India. As per the study by ICAR CMFRA, it's migrating off all the way to Sri Lanka. There are projections under the FAO and IPCC wherein, due to climate change, fish are expected to migrate. Even under the ITLOS advisory opinion on the Commission on a Small Island Developing State, ITLOS has also made clear that fish will migrate due to climate change, and there would be economic implications for that. This might also lead to what was already happening in the mackerel war, wherein climate change induced migration of Northeast Atlantic mackerel from the coast of Norway and UK all the way to Iceland led to conflict. While this was titled as mackerel war, there was no involvement of Navy. Now, as fish migrate, as already mentioned, fish does not know where the geographical boundaries are, so the fishermen will follow, and that will lead to IMBL transgressions. And already we are aware of the fact that artisanal or small-scale fishers often cross the IMBLs, and these are either Commission on a Small Island Developing State. ITLOS has also made clear that fish will migrate due to climate change, and there would be economic implications for that. This might also lead to what was already happening in the mackerel war, wherein climate change induced migration of Northeast Atlantic mackerel from the coast of Norway and UK all the way to Iceland led to conflict. While this was titled as mackerel war, there was no involvement of Navy. Now, as fish migrate, as already mentioned, fish does not know where the geographical boundaries are, so the fishermen will follow, and that will lead to IMBL transgressions. And already we are aware of the fact that artisanal or small-scale fishers often cross the IMBLs, and these are either established under bilateral agreements or between coastal states or under an order passed by ITLOS or other international tribunal. Now, while this would happen, this might also lead to the famous code wars again. Navies will get involved, coast guards will get involved, as is the situation between India and Sri Lanka. And while code wars, again, if it happens, there will also be an issue with regard to industrial fisheries versus artisanal fisheries. Now, if you can see the image, the figures there, compared to 2018 and 2025, there's been a decline in fisheries by 78.6% in the Bay of Bengal, just in the Bay of Bengal region. And AS data have identified fishing vessels flagged in Taiwan, Japan, and Australia to fish in the region. Overfishing is always linked to IUU fishing, and this is a conservation issue between India and Bangladesh when it comes to Hilsa conservation. And overfishing would also lead to cases like the southern bluefin tuna case, wherein Japan violated the terms of the experimental fishing program, which was initially introduced by Australia and New Zealand to conserve the southern bluefin tuna. And what we need to understand here is that while ITLOS has issued a provincial measure in 1999, southern bluefin tuna is considered as an endangered species. There are governance gaps also, as given in the image. Those two red areas are unregulated fisheries areas, and as you can see, none of the RFMOs does not come within the Bay of Bengal region. So there is an absence of RFMOs within the Bay of Bengal. And as I recently conducted a literature review and found that most of the RFMO IUU vessel lists are not updated. There is also the impact of marine eutrophication in the Bay of Bengal, and the region is considered to be oxygen deficient compared to Arabian Sea. And this rises from marine pollution emanating from inland water sources, dumping in the marine ecosystem, and interestingly, there is a dead zone extending to a limit of 60,000 kilometers within the Bay of Bengal. And the pink area that you can see is the dead zone. And as per research, the area is extending beyond 60,000 square kilometers. And what happens when there is oxygen deficiency or marine pollution in the area is jellyfish blooms. Now, we are all aware that jellyfish can impact not just fisheries operation but other activities also in the marine region. And during my visit to Australia in this Feb 2026, we went to Hobart as part of a fellowship, and I found interestingly that while Hobart is situated very close to Antarctica, the coastal areas in Hobart was full of jellyfish. So, as already mentioned by Dr. Udon, climate change is a very big stressor for fisheries, and this is the impact of IUU fishing in Bay of Bengal. Now, as already mentioned, the numbers have declined. 78% decrease in fisheries in the region. Commercial species diversity is shrinking. In 2018, there were 9 species. Now it's 5 species, and most of the species are migrating, looking for specific or habitats which is very different. Now, what are the maritime security implications of IUU fishing in the Bay of Bengal region? Now, this is official data from the PIB website as of 27 November 2025. You can see the number of Indian fishermen arrested, and this is the data from the Indian Coast Guard fact sheet as of Feb 2026. Now, you can relate this anti-poaching apprehension to the data of poaching from IFC-IOR website document. And if you see the value of catch that was taken, it's huge, and the nationality of the crew. So this raises a question of what exactly is happening within the Bay of Bengal compared to Arabian Sea. So Arabian Sea is mostly Chinese distilled fishing fleets, but in Bay of Bengal it's different. You have fishing boats coming from different of different flags. Now there is a gap under UNCLOS. Now if the coastal state is to take another coastal state to the court for IUU fishing, now Article 297, I'll just focus on the highlighted area there. The coastal state shall not be obliged to accept the submission to such settlement. So if somebody is taken to the court, they can say that as per this provision of UNCLOS, we do not accept your submission. There is also fisheries diplomacy that is being highlighted in the Bay of Bengal region. Now, these are the MOUs that are signed by the Department of Fisheries, Ministry of Animal Husbandry, Fisheries and Dairying, And as you can see in point number 2, India signed a MOU with Bangladesh for fisheries cooperation. And recently, India and Bangladesh concluded the release of arrested fishermen from both the countries. Now, this is something that would work in the Bay of Bengal. So, before I conclude my presentation, some recommendations on how we can improve the situation in Bay of Bengal. India and Sri Lanka established a joint working group on fisheries in 2016, and I would recommend that both the countries should cooperate actively instead of leading to a possible mackerel war. Expedite the release of fishermen arrested in both the countries instead of increasing the number of arrests. And some specific recommendations under BIMSTEC. So under the BIMSTEC Master Plan of Fisheries and Livestock Cooperation, there is a task group that was established, and it is necessary that there should formulate an RPOA IUU, or under the BIMSTEC IORA MOU also you can have an RPOA IUU and create a RFMO specific for the Bay of Bengal region. With that, these are my concluding remarks. So there is a transboundary approach that we require in the Bay of Bengal region because there are maritime zones that are overlapping. There are pressures of climate change and overfishing that I want in my presentation. Thank you.